Hello and welcome to Voices Unveiled, an audio podcast from Women for Biodiversity. Here we share women's stories from different corners of the world. I'm your host, Sumina. A happy Earth Day to all our listeners. To celebrate this day, we would like to focus on the important role that youth play in biodiversity conservation. And I'm pleased to introduce you to Sudha and Shruthi Kottillil, two young researchers from India, on today's episode. They are sisters in real life and in conservation. Both Sudha and Shruthi started working in terrestrial landscape, but recently their work has been focused on marine conservations, particularly elasmobranchs, including sharks, skates and rays found along the Indian coast, with a special focus on sustainable fisheries and consumption. They both are a part of the Global Youth Biodiversity Network, or GYBN, and also lead the India chapter of GYBN. I personally had the chance to meet Sudha and Shruthi last year at COP16 in Cali, Colombia, and I was truly amazed and impressed by their deep understanding and comprehensive approach to conservation. So today, we'll explore what ignited their passion, the challenges young professionals like them face in decision-making spaces, their thoughts on the recent CBD COP16, and how they stay motivated despite of it all. But before we dive in, please subscribe and follow Women for Biodiversity on social media. Our handles are in the description box. Your support means the world to us. Thank you so much, Shruthi and Sudha. Once again, it's wonderful to have you both on this podcast. What sparked your passion to pursue a career in biodiversity conservation, and especially in this specific area?
Yeah, sure. Maybe I could start and then I could say my side and Shruthi could also share her story.
Yeah.
So I think for me, it's largely, I've always been interested in animals or ecology ever since I was in school. So I don't really have any particular, specific point or a specific incident that really made me interested in this field. In school, learning about biology or learning about animals, ecosystems was always something that I really enjoyed. And I think after coming back from school also, something that I really liked was watching this. I mean, that was the only access I had to knowing about, knowing about wildlife and the ecosystems and forests and all of that. So National Geographic, Discovery Channel, all those presenters talking about animals, their behavior. So that is what sort of kind of got me interested in this field. And as I, was going through my classes and deciding on what to do for my college, I think it was quite natural for me to opt for something that would enable me to work with animals more closely. And that's how I then went on to take zoology and then do my master's in environmental studies. But I think during my college years, I did a couple of internships with some of the NGOs working in India, especially on rehabilitation and wildlife conservation. And that kind of really instilled in me the fact that this is what I'm passionate about. This is what I really want to commit and work for the rest of my life. So I think these internships and volunteering opportunities that I had was something that really made it clear to me that I want to pursue this field. But then I was still not very specifically focused on the marine space. So I was brought up in a coastal city called Chennai in India, and we have the beach is quite accessible. We have access to the beach, all these activities that are associated with the sea. But then even in college, I was largely working on terrestrial landscape. But in the masters, when I was studying, that's when it struck me that, India, despite being surrounded by water on three sides, we hardly learn about our marine ecosystems, the complexities of the challenges, and how actually effective conservation happens for marine animals or, marine ecosystems. So this thought then kind of pushed me to look for a master's dissertation or an opportunity to work on my thesis for master's in the marine space. And that's how I sort of kind of, after looking up opportunities, I kind of got a chance to work on elasmobranchs, so sharks, rays, and skates, looking at the genetic diversity along the Indian coast. And that the first couple of days on field, like understanding this and completely new landscape, even though I've been, as I mentioned before, being brought up in a coastal city, it was completely eye-opening for me to know how difficult it is to work in marine landscape just because of the vastness, the interlinkages of livelihoods, people, and the ocean resource. All of these was and the scale of fishing, just the scale of fishing was all of these was really eye-opening for me. And that's when I kind of realized that this is really the space I want to work in for, for the rest of my life, focus on marine conservation space. That's because not a lot of activities, even though it's catching up, it's quite limited in India in terms of the work that happens in the marine space. So yeah, so I think working on sharks and rays, which are kind of keystone and charismatic species, further, pull me in to work on, sustainable fisheries and other, and to continue working on elasmobranchs. Shruti, yeah.
Yeah, I think it's somewhat a similar background for me, but I think I've also been naturally attracted to nature and wildlife and animals. And I think more so because when you come back from school and then you switch on your TV, back in the day, I think that's what you were exposed to as well in National Geographic and Animal Planet, where you had a lot of very good, uh, very good content coming out. Not like it was not like it is today, but probably much better content on animals and wildlife and nature during those times. So that sort of also kind of helped me understand nature a bit better because it's not like as children we used to visit national parks or or other nature spots that often, but it was sort of these avenues that opened up my understanding of nature and biodiversity and the opportunities that exist. And also our uncle is in this field, so working him seeing him work in wildlife and really enjoying it and being passionate about it is also something that really drove me to also take this up as a possible profession, although there are challenges to it. But I think the ultimate happiness or the satisfaction that comes from being in nature and being able to work with animals, which is what I thought this job would involve in the beginning, as I think most of us do, really propelled me. So then that's when I did my studies in zoology and environmental science, and then did my few projects on terrestrial ecosystems, like on working on bats, temple roosting bats, and all of that gave me a much better understanding of what it is, what it really means to be working in biodiversity conservation. I think at that stage, internships and volunteering opportunities sort of give you an idea of this is something really that you really want to do. And yeah, and I think it cemented my interest for working in this field, in this profession as well. And yeah, and I think for the masters I wanted to branch out a little bit, like Sudha mentioned, and really focus on areas that people don't usually talk about, which was the marine conservation area. And yeah, and it is a chance opportunity that I think both of us got different projects on sharks, rays, and skates to work on. So I was looking at the catch composition and the survival rate of a few species of sharks, so that release after capture could be a possible conservation strategy. And I think that was really fascinating, and that was a really fascinating study to be able to understand the survival rate of different species and then release them back into the wild and see and get that satisfaction from it. That and being and working as part of the master's dissertation, you spend a lot of time working on them and understanding them. That I really wanted to follow up my work also on these animals, on these species, and it sort of continued from there. And yeah, and I've enjoyed learning about them and working with them. So I think, yeah, and I think it sort of naturally leads you to branch out also to different aspects of conservation, which is, I think, looking at livelihoods and local community support and all of that. Yeah.
Thank you so much for that very detailed answer. And wow, like it's very inspiring to hear your work, your passion. And you both are very passionate about these things because you speak so passionately, fondly about your experiences and your aspirations as young professionals. But I also want to ask, like, how can young professionals like yourselves use your power to create real change in biodiversity conservation?
So I think with this, it's very, it's I think two aspects of a different coin, because I think as young people, some of the advantages are the fact that we start out, we're just starting out, so we have a lot of different ideas, a lot of different avenues to explore, uh, different facets of biodiversity conservation, especially in this field, but also in general. So I think there's a real power in being able to work in different aspects of whatever it is that you're passionate about, and try to explore and see if that is something that really you want to do. And also at this time, I think there's a lot of accessibility to resources and information that young people can utilize and use to their advantage. So I think we have now online platforms where we have job opportunities, volunteer opportunities, expression of interest for various different positions, and things like that, which young people can really utilize and further their career and be exposed to a lot of different ideas and different ideas and opportunities. I think that's a very big advantage for people, young people in this day and age. And I think there's also the fact that young people have a very neutral position in society, so they're able to not just influence but also, I think, cater to a number of different audiences and stakeholders in the work that they do, and even generally as a member of society, that the young people are able to access a lot more different spaces and avenues and not be considered a threat as of yet. So I think that also can be leveraged by young people for the work that they do personally. And the other thing I think is, given the current situation right now and the circumstances, there is a collective feeling among the young people, because I think they've learned from the past mistakes and see what are the wrongs in society right now, and are able to understand that, comprehend it, and bring out the collective feeling of collaborative work and the importance of collaborative work and the importance and the need to work together for a common goal and shared future. I think all of these are good. All of these are advantages that young people have right now and can be powerfully leveraged, I think, for going forward. Sudha?
Yeah, not really to compliment, but my thoughts on what was your question, Sumina. I think as young professionals, when as young people, I think when we do talk to our parents or grandparents, they weren't exposed to the kind of issues or challenges that we have to deal with in terms of environment or biodiversity loss or climate change. So I mean, even when I speak to my family members or my people from who are older than us, they never really had subjects like environmental science or topics of this. So it just shows how we are born into a world where change is, we really need to make the change in order to be able to live in harmony with nature. So I feel like as young people who, even future generations, we are growing up with a need or understanding as to we have to work towards making this world a better place in terms of not just societal challenges but also in terms of nature, biodiversity, climate change. So as young people, I feel like we do have a little bit more of an understanding and holistic approach, just because we have access to technology, we have access to YouTube, we have access to internet and TV and and books and all of these other resources for us to better understand and get a better picture. So I feel like as young professionals, utilizing all these different channels and avenues to learn, understand, and then come up with strategies or solutions is an advantage for us, because in conservation space we do hear about how protected areas and those kind of fortress conservation is not really the way forward anymore. I think scientists or people when scientists or researchers did come up with this proposal, they didn't look at it in a holistic manner, the understanding the effects that it might have down long term down the line. So I feel like as young people, we have that opportunity to learn from the mistakes that have happened, and also read up and understand better on how to navigate these complex situations, and in order to not make the same mistakes that we've made previously. So that it is where I see like a real power to create change in for biodiversity conservation. And I also think the other real power for young people is to not really be focused on one aspect of work. For example, if somebody is working on species conservation, or just maybe elephants or even tigers, just focusing on that aspect of work and not really looking at the other bigger picture is not the norm anymore. So when you're working with, just to give our example, when we work with elasmobranch conservation, we obviously have to work with understand the livelihoods of fishing people, fisher communities, understand how they relate to the ocean, how they depend on the ocean, and then work with them to create a solution or a strategy to make a change. So this kind of a holistic approach is, or ecosystem-based approach, and including IPLCs, including the traditional knowledge, is coming up in a huge way. And I feel like those kind of solutions that come out of these bigger discussions and bigger you know uh, groups will help us identify a much more inclusive and effective way to conserve our protect our biodiversity and work with communities. So I feel like recognizing complexity, utilizing the different avenues that we have to understand the problem and come up with a solution, and the passion and the dynamism to bring about a change in the situation that we are currently in, I feel like are the real powers that young people have today.
Thank you for listening to our podcast. This is a quick announcement that Women for Biodiversity will be hosting a series of webinars for Restore Her Rights initiative. So this series will highlight women-led and gender-inclusive restoration efforts to build evidence that can inspire equitable policies and programs. So it will begin from 25th April this month and will take place at the last Friday of each month until October this year. So for more information, please go to our website www.womenforbiodiversity.org or keep an eye on our socials. Okay, back to the podcast.
Okay, so keeping that in mind, so what are the challenges young people face in being heard in decision-making processes then, or decision-making spaces then?
For decision-making spaces, I think the first step definitely was to get a space in the decision-making process. So to be able to be invited into these discussions or to be seen as people who have something important or meaningful to say. I know this is changing in the global north, especially in Europe and America, where young people have started being integrated into government roles and government where they do have a real meaningful voice or opinion to say. Although it might not be the case for all countries, but certainly for some of them, as I'm finding out through my interactions with other young people. And I think once you do get a seat at the table, or once you do have that entry first step into the decision making spaces, making sure that you're not dismissed easily. I think as young people or professionals, there's a huge challenge for us to be seen as people who are coming in with lack of experience or lack of on ground knowledge and stuff like that. So we are seen as people who don't have that, who are dismissed as being young people because we don't have that experience, 5 or 10 years of experience that others have. But I think the value lies in the fact that even though we don't have that experience, we do come in with a lot of other viewpoints, a lot of other experiences that we have through our, through the everyday interactions, through our through issues and challenges that we face on a daily basis. And the other thing is, once these decision-making spaces are open, I think to avoid making sure that these kind of interactions or engagements are tokenistic. So a lot of times youth become just like a checklist on documents or or on paper to say that okay, we have included 1 or 2 young people, we've invited 1 or 2 young people, and that's it. We have included youth as a whole. So that kind of a tokenistic engagement is something that we are still struggling to overcome as a youth network, as a global youth network that has a momentum, that has proven to people that we are capable of change. We do have a lot of meaningful dialogues and discussions to bring to the table. Avoiding this tokenistic engagement is something that we are still trying to navigate and manage effectively, and to make sure it doesn't happen to young people within the community and elsewhere.
Yeah, I think just to add to that, I think it's also granted that youth activism in the past has had a bad reputation. I think because the way it's been portrayed in the past has not gone down well with a number of different people, even in the international space or the local level. And I think that's something that has given. We have tried hard not to do, that is have any aggressive form of like activism or a very targeted sort of action, but more working within the system and trying to bridge gaps and the distances within the system itself while working with a number of different collaborators or having an intergenerational collaboration among different actors and different people in society. So I think that's where we, as GYBN, are trying to consciously change and have been working in that way for a long time now.
When I met you both in COP16, and I read the position paper for GYBN as well, at that time it had included an element of including indigenous people and local communities and traditional knowledge in your list of recommendations as well, right? So, however, their knowledge is often overlooked as well. And I'm glad that Sudha earlier also talked about IPs and LCs. So I want to understand, how can youth better integrate national or traditional ecological knowledge into biodiversity strategies that can be rolled out into, let's say, national strategies, and implemented at the local level as well?
Sumira, you brought up a very important point about how better uh, IPLCs can be engaged in this space. I think they are the ones who are at the forefront of facing the effects of climate change and biodiversity loss, and also the ones who have to navigate it much more than any of us. Living in cities or even in rural landscape who are not directly, dependent on natural resources for their livelihoods or daily income. So I think even in working in the marine space, it just becomes more apparent how important it is to work with them in to put the species as well as to put the species ecosystem and the people who are dependent on them at the center of any strategy or action plan. And most often it also just involves opening up these spaces or opening up, facilitating the connection of IPLCs being a part of these discussions, being a part of these spaces. We don't necessarily have to talk for them, but opening up the space for them to come and share their viewpoints, to navigate the spaces in the way they see fit is a big thing. And I feel like as young people, we are much more aware of these kind of situations, and we are much more aware of the need to include them in these kind of discussions. So I see that kind of change happening in this generation and going forward, where people want to really engage indigenous people and local communities in a much more meaningful way.
So I think young people have a very crucial role to bring those voices, more marginalized voices from the indigenous people and local communities to the forefront. And I think one way to probably do that is also through by talking to is by talking going into the ground on the field and talking to uh, local communities and indigenous people and trying to understand their perspective, because I think most of the time they are unable to access these spaces and these platforms, and it is up to us who have the privilege or that opportunity to really make sure that we reflect the voices of society. And with young people now really understanding the need to go back to your roots and to go back to your um, regional or local context and to really apply those principles there and bring it to the international space, I think it becomes important for us to go back and gather those voices that need to be represented or that need that space.
So that while scientific studies does have its robustness and does have its role in communicating things that are important, and important and meaningful, and identifying priorities and needs as to where our actions must lie. I think it's also important to acknowledge that people uh, who have been reliant on these ecosystems for their day-to-day life and livelihoods also have an equally important understanding of the ecosystems, the natural resources, and how to better manage it. And it also includes identifying, how traditionally they've been managing these resources. Most often, we understand that the traditional management mechanisms have been quite successful without any outside intervention. So instead of looking at it in isolation, I feel like combining both of these kind of traditional knowledge and scientific knowledge has a much powerful and effective impact.
Okay, so you both attended the first COP16 in Cali, Colombia last year, and as part of the youth group in CBD or the GYBN, how do you feel about the overall result of the both CBD COPs, that is the COP16 in Colombia and the COP16.2 in Italy that just concluded in February?
So in part one, we had the recognition of Indigenous People Fund as well as the recognition of people from African descent. So there were successes and positives in part one, and which was although through a lot of deliberations, which was also continued on to part two, which it is positive news. But again, it has happened before where we have had a transformative policy and yet things have not managed to work out. So even though this was a difficult process to get up to COP16 part 2 and to have it finalized, which again went up to I think early morning hours again and wasn't a very smooth process, which we hoped all the parties and negotiators would have learned from COP16 part 1. But I think at least the positive is that they found an end to it, and we have now a finalized framework. Now it's up to the countries to make sure that it's done properly and the way it's done is proper.
Yeah, so we did I did attend the COP16 in Kali last year, the part one, but I couldn't attend part two in Rome that happened earlier this year. Although we did have like a given delegation attending the events and following the discussions in Rome this in 2025. The bit of a good news is that the things on financing, monitoring, and all those important discussions that could not happen in Kali happened in Rome. Delegations and countries were able to find consensus, and we do have a document on monitoring and financing. Although a bit of a disappointing news is the fact that NBSAP updation is lagging behind. The deadline was supposed to be last year when all countries should have submitted their updated NBSAPs, but we're still waiting on it, and that's a huge drawback given that NBSAPs are a way for us to implement and track the implementation of KMGBF at local level. And if we're still lagging behind on it's a huge question mark about how the whole framework would actually be implemented. The other quickly to add is the fact that I think engagement of young people at COP16 Part 2 was quite disappointing, because I don't think any of our youth members were given any important spaces to speak about or given interventions on the discussions that were happening. So this was also a drawback.
The last question then. How do you keep your passion alive when the scale of the environmental crisis seems overwhelming sometimes? Or a lot of times.
Yeah, so this is a conversation that we have as young people quite often. I mean, the scale of environmental crisis and the pace at which we're progressing, if you look at it, you know, is quite disheartening. But the issue is also that if we are not there, if the people who are working towards biodiversity conservation don't, stop working on it just because of the scale at which it's going, and just because of the disheartening information that we get on a daily basis, I feel like the impact that we are having now would be much more staggered, would be much more, behind than what we are on at the moment. I do recognize that the progress that we are in at the moment is clearly severely lacking. But even if we didn't have that momentum behind us, just imagine where we would be at this point is just scary. So I feel like, when I think about the impact that we need to make, and just the thought about if the huge group of young people, like organizations like Women for Biodiversity, and a lot of other grassroots organizations who are doing the amazing work that they do, if those kind of impacts and those kind of work don't happen, we're just going to be in a much more horrible state than we are in right now. So I think the fact that there is a huge community, despite going forward, despite the challenges, despite the hardships, is what really keeps me inspired. When I just as Shruthi mentioned, my uncle is also in this field, and when I see him, working on this conservation of actions, working on a lot of being inclusive in the conservation strategies and really making an impact, and not just my uncle, but even other young people in the community, other young women in the community, other young, not just young people, but even experts who have been in this field for a lot of generations, who have been doing really good work. I think when I look at their work and realize that, I'm also contributing, in some small way into that huge pool of work, momentum towards biodiversity conservation, that is what really keeps me going. But not to say that I don't feel disheartened. There are days when I do feel disheartened, thinking about, despite so many efforts going, we're not really able to make a change. But learning, or, just mulling over that fact will not really get us anywhere. So I think that is what looking forward to a change is what really keeps me pushing, and knowing that there's a community there to support me.
To add to just maybe what Sudha said, to keep it short, yeah, I think it's mostly to do with the knowing that the small steps that you take and the small steps that you make, even though it would be maybe 3 or 4 months down the line when you see those results, that really pushes you to work for conservation. And I think in general, when you do enter a space or a field like this, uh, we are going into it aware that the efforts that you put in now, may the results of which you will see probably 2 or 3 years, or maybe even more down the line, because that's how it takes for nature to bounce back or rebound or even show some uh, positive results. So I think, and when you do see positive news and follow positive news from conservation sites, it keeps that optimism up. Even though sometimes you have to do it intentionally so that you are in touch with all the good things that are happening. I think that really keeps keeps you motivated and keeps me also motivated to know that there are people all around the world working towards this, and it's not just me or not just a few people here and there who are doing it. So I think it's more about uh, going outside of your bubble and seeing what's happening around the world, and keep being in touch with all the actions and changes that are happening that will keep you motivated and encourage you to keep moving forward.
Thank you for staying with us until the end of the podcast. I hope you enjoyed that conversation as much as I did. If you'd like to connect with us, follow Women for Biodiversity on social media. The handles are in the description box, and please don't hesitate to share this episode. The more the merrier. You can reach us at communications@womenforbiodiversity.org. Remember, that's the number 4 instead of FOR. So until the next episode, stay strong and carry on.